Is it truly worth it? That's a question I'm sure a lot of us ask ourselves when confronted with a difficult choice. We take out a scale and try to weigh the consequences of something opposed to the good it will bring. It's uncomfortable for many to teeter on uncertainty when the outcome of a choice could potentially change the entire course of your life. The moment you decide to make your sacrifice, you're already asking yourself, what if? However, sometimes we value one choice so much that we never take time to think about any other options. The moment you lose control of yourself is when you start to destroy everything and everyone around you. When something becomes your everything, it's easy to end up with nothing. Alternatively, it's possible to not value something enough. Only by the time it's gone do you realize how much it was worth. In both cases, you begin to regret the choices you never made, the ones you very well could have. That's the story of Kagurabachi's antagonist, Kyora Sazanami, the leader of the now fallen Sazanami clan. His actions alone aren't the reason behind his clan's failure. It was the result of multiple generations of persistent atrocities. I'd like to make the case today that this family is the embodiment of this manga's core message, or at least what I think it is. Kagurabachi is a manga written and illustrated by Takeru Okazono. Before it had even come out, people had begun making memes about it since modern shonen wasn't in the best of places. The most popular series at the time had questionable quality and left fans practically lobotomized after every bi-weekly chapter release. Not only that, many popular modern shonen series were nearing their finish lines, so people were kind of uneasy trying to find something worthy of wielding their torch. Then came Kagurabachi, which initially did nothing to calm anyone down. People thought that Chihiro, the protagonist, looked generic and edgy. He honestly isn't helping himself by saying shit like this. Every morning, when I wash my face and look in the mirror, I see this scar. And I remember that day. So every day, I start the morning fresh with hatred. You'd be hard-pressed if I told you that he had a softer side. People then started saying that this is the greatest piece of fiction ever conceived. Look at how cool this guy is, unsheathing his sword sideways. People were being ironic at the time, but the truly ironic thing about this whole situation was that Kagurabachi ended up being really good. So good that I'll go on record to say that modern shonen is in pretty good hands. Let's just hope that after soaring great heights, it doesn't fall off immediately after it releases its best arc. Looking at you, 2010's Big Three!
How'd you get over there?
Over where?
There!
Where?
There! How'd you get over there?
To answer the obvious question, who are the Sazanamis, and why are they so important? I think they're representative of everything this manga has been trying to say. It's a dissection of the human psyche, attempting to reveal the complexities of the choices we make. It doesn't try to justify every decision we make, but it at least gives us enough information for us to understand why we do some of the things we do. With that out of the way, let's get into the analysis. The Sazanami clan consists of many proficient sorcerers who have pledged their allegiance to the Sazanami family. They are known in the criminal underworld for hosting one of the biggest auctions on the black market, the Rakuzaichi. Those who attend it bid on illegal contraband, like powerful weapons, but it becomes even more disturbing when you find out it also serves as a massive human trafficking scheme. The kinds of people that attend the event are amongst some of the most heinous. In the scene just before Chihiro meets Akuri, we overhear a conversation in which the members of a gang talk about how their don was a fan of younger women. He was planning on purchasing some at the Rakuzaichi to sexually gratify himself. Those lines served to emphasize how depraved the entire thing was. The clan persisted for a bit over 2 centuries and managed to get the entire world to turn a blind eye to their atrocities. Orchestrating all of this as the 11th head is Kyora Sazanami. As the leader of the clan, he also serves as the Rakuzaichi's auctioneer. This elevates him to a status that is highly revered in the underworld. Outside of the Rakuzaichi, who is he? That's actually a question that's nearly impossible to answer, since every aspect of his life was centered around it. He's a widowed, middle-aged man who is the father to several children. It's not very clear how many he has, but the children he's seen with the most are the members of the Toe. More about them later. The Sazanami clan is also a patriarchy, meaning that the eldest son is the one who is elected as the clan head when the father passes away or steps down. Nothing is really said about how Kyora was raised, but we at least know from flashbacks that he deeply admired his father and wanted nothing more than to uphold his family's legacy. We also know that his marriage with his wife, who is unnamed, was arranged. There was no intimacy in their relationship. It was merely transactional. Simply put, they were only together just so that they could have children to elevate the status of the Rakuzaichi. In essence, a mindset was fostered in him that made him treat every aspect of his life as an exchange. Even the way he fights is based around making exchanges. As a brilliant strategist, he sits back and commands others to do his fighting for him, especially in fights he knows he can easily lose. He can use his cunningness to manipulate his enemies into his domain. He forces them to make an exchange, knowing that he stands to gain everything as a result. Like how he used Hakuri as a bargaining chip to make Chihiro give up his enchanted blade. Couple this with the fact that he has countless hostages that he can kill at any moment. This way of thinking greatly warped how he valued the people around him. As the leader of the clan, he expected that a certain standard was met, hence his abusive relationship with his son Hakuri. He neglects Hakuri and allows him to suffer at the hands of his siblings. The Toe is a group of the Sazanami's most powerful sorcerers. They consist of Kyora's most powerful children, Soya, Tenri, Tamaki, and Enji. Kyora shows a lot of favoritism towards them because of their talents. Hakuri couldn't use any sorcery, and therefore had no use to the family. He didn't disown him outright, he only kept him around as a courtesy. It's a gross understatement to say that Hakuri was bullied because of this. He was being tortured. The worst offender of them all was his older brother, Soya. Though he claimed to love Hakuri most of all, he did inhumane things to him, like using pliers to break his fingers. They treated him no better than the people they trafficked. This is a testament not only to how cruel they could be, but most importantly, Kyora. He raised them to be that way. The last straw was only when Hakuri failed to guard one of the prisoners. Hakuri was different from his family since he was the only one capable of expressing his empathy. Being treated the way he did allowed him to see from the perspective of a prisoner, and eventually he He thought he bonded with one. She manipulated him by taking advantage of his kindness. Once he released her, she quickly took a chance to take her own life, stating that there was no hope outside of her cage. To Hakuri, he'd lost a friend, but to the rest of his family, he ruined the merchandise. He was then exiled from the clan, but little did they know, this would be their worst mistake. There's a gift that the clan leader typically possesses called Storehouse. It's a sorcery that gives its user access to a subspace in which they can transfer items they've registered with their spiritual energy. The person who possesses this typically isn't able to use this technique, and Iso, a combat sorcery, at the same time. Only the clan founder could. The reason why Soya was so abusive to Hakuri was because Kyora had put him on a pedestal. He had kept telling him that he would be the one to inherit the gift, and that Tenri would be his sword. This is probably what twisted his love for Hakuri. It wasn't based on compassion, but rather a sick sense of pity. He goes on to say that what Hakuri did was because he was seduced. When Hakuri stood up to him, he was surprised that he even did so in the first place. What came as an even bigger surprise to everyone was the fact that Hakuri was the one who ended up inheriting Storehouse. Not only that, he could also use Iso. It's at this moment that Soya's true colors are finally revealed. He berates his brother with a bitter envy, but he is promptly defeated. This also occurs in the same chapter where Tenri meets his untimely demise. As our protagonists continue to storm the Rakuzaichi, Enji knew that they were helpless and wanted to surrender, but Tenri wanted to keep fighting for his father's sake. Kyora then has him give up his life by giving him a piece of Datenseki. By making him wield it, he overloaded his body, making it erupt in a bloody explosion. It's afterwards that everything spirals out of Kyora's control. With the joint effort of Hakuri and the Kamunabi, Chihiro managed to save all of the hostages within the storeroom, and also managed to land a decisive slash on Kyora. Still, he tried to keep the auction alive. He resorted to using the Magatsumi, the most powerful and dangerous enchanted blade. But its original wielder became his puppeteer, ensuring that Kyora's actions were no longer his own. Eventually, he realized that everything he did was in vain, and finally began to think about everything he had lost. His life flashed before his eyes, and he envisioned a world in which he saw his family living happily together. In his final moments, he defied the control of the Magatsumi and surrendered. There are three key points I want to touch on with regards to Kagurabachi's themes. The first one I want to talk about is its exploration of family legacies. It's not uncommon for a manga to explore a complicated family dynamic. Oftentimes, the mangaka is asking their audience to evaluate what family means to them, and Kagurabachi is no different. Chihiro's relationship with his father was stable. The worst things ever got between the two was light scolding. Other than that, they enjoyed one another's company and sought to complement what the other could do in their relationship. That was only disrupted because the Hishaku stole the enchanted blades. They didn't end on bad terms, just only before things could get better between them. Despite facing insurmountable odds, he chooses to fight for what his father stood for. That's his way of valuing his family legacy. Then you have people who are in the middle but lean more towards the extreme. Fence-sitters, if you will. This is where you find characters like Iori Samura, who I will speak about very briefly considering that she's a character introduced relatively recently. For a time, she wasn't on terms so bad with her father that they couldn't have a stable relationship. Their greatest point of contention was that her association with him heavily impacted her social life and safety. She wants a close relationship with the only family she has, but is faced with a dilemma in which sacrificing that may be worth it for her to live a normal life. Hakuri is evidently on the most extreme side of the spectrum of family drama. They tortured him, made him complicit in the torturing of others, and eventually disowned him because he could not meet Kyora's cold standards. Eventually, he learned that being useful was more than strength alone. It could mean providing comfort to those who've lost hope, or inspiring others to act as he would. By focusing purely on his material value, Kyora failed to recognize Hakuri's greatest gift. Not the storehouse sorcery, but his empathy, something his family sorely lacked. It's because of that, Hakuri's allegiance to his clan changed, as could anyone in his position. What this goes to show is that not all families are worth fighting for, or they weren't really a family to begin with. Hakuri, along with Chihiro and Iori, constantly have to reassess whether or not their choices, their loyalties, mean something. Which families are worth fighting for, and which legacies are worth leaving behind. After many chapters of build-up, it's finally been revealed what went down during the Seitei War. Again, I'm not gonna go into any details since it happened recently, but what I will tell you is this. As much as power can be liberating, so too can it be seductive. It's something that can corrupt even the most well-intentioned of people, especially in desperation. Evidently, something happened during the Seitei War that was so disturbing that even its most important figures weren't proud. Of course, this sentiment is heavily connected to the enchanted blades, weapons that were so destructive that every major organization in Japan is after them. What Magatsumi can do alone makes you question why you even need the others. Those that seek power simply to obtain it are inherently self-serving and fail to understand what it truly means. When Kyora hastily handed Tenri that piece of Datenseki, he probably believed that it was going to ensure victory, despite what he might tell us. Just like the war heroes, he made the same mistake they did. Ultimately, that cost him in ways that he couldn't account for. Also, look at how much drive he had to keep the auction going despite being on the brink of death. This is because he viewed power just like how he viewed everything else in his life. Materialistically, it's something he needed to have no matter what. It's this obsession with power that Kunishige warns us about at the very beginning of the series. When Chihiro expressed the desire to make powerful katanas like the enchanted ones, he was met with a cautionary message from his father.
These aren't necessarily the right answer. You can't just strive to make strong enchanted blades. You're gonna have to look at the world through your own eyes and think carefully about what kind of katana it needs and why.
True power is obtained through understanding, not through status nor through strength. Kyora didn't have someone to guide him like Chihiro did, so the pursuit of power was all he had ever known. At least, it's all he thought he had known. There's a brief but very important scene that plays out during the end of the Rakuzaichi arc. As his life flashes before his eyes, Kyora Sazanami thinks back to his wife's dying words. She tells him that if he had not been so concerned with upholding tradition, he wouldn't have turned out to be such a bad person. Immediately, a waterfall of what-ifs begin cascading on our heads. We are reminded that Kyora is indeed a human being. He too is capable of regret and reflection. The only reason he wanted to uphold the integrity of the Rakuzaichi was because it was his only reason to live. Of course, being raised like Kyora isn't guaranteed to make you a monster. Despite their attempts to indoctrinate him, Hakuri at least had enough agency to defy his family. He was fortunate enough to discover things worth fighting for outside of the Rakuzaichi, whilst Kyora didn't. In addition to flashbacks of his life, there are also moments that show Kyora's tenderness towards his children. He was eager to see them flourish as skilled sorcerers. He expressed pride in Tenri since he managed to become the strongest toe in history. Despite how poorly he treated him, he hesitated to kill Hakuri. Hakuri even states at the end of the arc that his father was his North Star. He truly looked up to him. The last thing Kyora heard Tenri say was sorry. Some may say his reaction is lacking, but I say it's perfect. He has nothing to say at this moment because he's thinking. It's what he's good at, especially when the stage of grief clearly being highlighted is bargaining. I like to think that he's asking himself, why is my boy apologizing when I'm the one that made him lay down his life? It was practically for nothing too, since what they were guarding had already been breached. He tries to play it off by saying that Tenri's death gave him additional information on how to beat the protagonist. But let's be real here. My man was coping and seething. I also think that losing Tenri was the first time he ever paid the price for something but got nothing in return. It wasn't a transaction, but rather a gamble. In essence, Kyora Sazanami may have forced himself to become a monster to appease his notion of tradition. After seeing what had become of the Rakuzaichi, but most importantly his family, being the head of the Sazanami clan meant nothing. He didn't reject the Magatsumi's influence as the head of the Sazanami clan, which he had so proudly boasted about being. He rejected it as Kyora Sazanami, as a person, not a figurehead. What if Kyora had been able to do this sooner? Well, that's when you get people like Hiyuki. A scene that I always go back to is Hiyuki's conversation with the Kamunabi's higher-ups, wherein she expresses her desire to do a complete takedown of the Rakuzaichi. Doing so would not only secure them an enchanted blade, but it would also prevent the trafficking of countless people. However, her perspective is harshly dismissed by them. Their justification for doing so was the risk it would pose to everyone involved. Not only would conflict get Kamunabi members killed, but the victims too. So she's faced with a moral dilemma, allowing the suffering of the few for the safety of the many. To do otherwise would mean dishonoring the organization and her country. It's only after hearing Mr. Inazuma's story that she finally finds the courage to take action. For context, Mr. Inazuma was a little boy whose sister had been kidnapped by human traffickers. She is up for sale at the Rakuzaichi. Since he had no one to turn to, he decided to take matters into his own hands to try and save her. If the little kid was brave enough to oppose the Rakuzaichi, then why wasn't she brave enough to defy her superiors when she knew that their actions were inadequate. It's then that she decides to partner up with her enemy, Chihiro, to do what needed to be done in the first place. In that moment, she was doing the right thing regardless of what she had been ordered to do. We don't know Hiyuki's backstory, but I think the point still stands. She's different from Kyora because she was able to suspend her reverence for the sacredness of authority. In doing so, she is able to hear the voices that call out to her when they need her. Kyora only ever listened to one, and only began to hear the others as they were whimpering out. What does this have to say about morality? Well, for one, it's complicated. As I stated before, Kyora isn't absolved of his actions simply because we understand his motives. However, what's put into perspective is how one's morality can be shaped by their circumstances. Maybe, in better words, one only begins to know morality when it's shaped by the circumstances of others. Kagurabachi encourages us to think about what we value, no matter how important or unimportant we perceive it to be, whether it be family, power, or our individual sense of right and wrong. What I take from that is if we choose to hold on to something so strongly, or refuse to seize a wonderful opportunity out of fear, we prevent ourselves from being happy. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to f*** off for a few months since I'm going to read a book just to make one video about a movie.